I'd like to say that you all have been at workshops all day long and talking with people all day long, and I think doing a lot of what I encourage us all to do, which is build political relationships, talk with each other, learn from each other, listen with each other. I think people are very excited about what's happened here. And all of the particulars, the subjects, the information, the areas of activism, the political points that were raised, all point in the same direction, which a number of us have raised throughout this day, the need to forge new strategies and a new analysis that allows anti-capitalism and an ecological sensitivity to the problems of where we're out today. And what do we do with it? And in conversation a few minutes ago with some folks about this same issue, I realized that what we're doing here, and what I hope we all will continue doing, when we try to create the politics that will arm us to go forward and fight not only against climate change, but all of the converging crises of energy, capitalism, and environment, that if we can come up with a framework that informs what we do with climate change, that puts this anti-capitalism and this environmental concerns together in a realistic way, in a way that we support the politics of, we will be armed with something that can inform every area of activism in the globe. Every area of activism. A lens through which to look at, to say what is to be done and how are we doing it, whether it's labor or healthcare or revolution, whatever it is, okay? And we have 3 speakers tonight who are going to help us look at these larger issues of what is eco-socialism and how do we go forward. The first of these, the first speaker, let me pull out my little sheet. The first speaker is Jill Stein. And some of you, Jill Stein is, if you read, told you all kinds of stuff on this little thing, but I think what's most important to her at this point is she's a doctor. She's also a 2012 presidential candidate, but she told me to tell you guys that the most presidential thing that she did was get arrested 3 times. And part of that was in support of the blockade against the Keystone XL pipeline. Right. She is also the President Jill? Yeah. Of the Green Shadow Cabinet. And if you don't know what that is, they've created another whole cabinet, the same representative people for each person in the cabinet in Washington, to watchdog them and see what they're actually doing. All right? So I give you Jill Stein.
So this is an amazing, awesome, wonderful conference. And thank you again so much to all the organizers. I had the great privilege back in February when I went to the February 17th Keystone Pipeline demonstration in Washington, D.C., feeling a little bit like I wasn't there to say forward with Obama on climate. And I wasn't there to have Obama's back, to tell you the truth. I was there to say, stop stabbing us in our backs, Obama. And I had this kind of love-hate relationship with the climate movement as we know it, because it tends to be very inside the box, as we all know. And I don't need to repeat that because I don't want to demean what they do. They've done something wonderful, which is really important and which begs to be expanded upon. And I'd like to focus on that in a minute as to how we can expand on it. But I also wanted to, to point out that it was just so uplifting. It was such a relief that Chris had asked me to be part of this Eco-Socialist Forum, which was taking place the night before the march. And it felt to me like that was the real heart of the environmental movement, and that is what the new climate movement looks like. And that's where the energy really was. And the energy was there out in the street. It was not up at the microphone, on the stage, where there was lots of praise for Obama, concern about his legacy. This is not about his legacy. This is about whether we have a planet to inhabit in 30 or 50 years from now. That's what this is about. And we need a climate movement that's up to the challenge here. I think the challenge of getting outside of the box, getting outside of the silos that we're all in. Whatever little piece of the movement we're working on, it tends to be our language. So we're talking about food sovereignty, we're talking about student debt, we're talking about getting rid of the banks, creating public banks. I've been really just so delighted to see how much convergence there is in our visions. And one of the things that made me feel really at home at the Eco-Socialist Forum back in February was that when I looked at what the agenda was for that forum, it was exactly the same agenda. It was the same flyer that I had prepared to go there as a Green, you know, to say, here's what we need to do. It's not this little itty-bitty kind of all of the above, which is it's not a climate plan. That is a distraction. It's smoke and mirrors. It's deception. All of the above is not the solution. We need 100% clean, renewable energy by 2030, actually. Let's beat the crisis on this, and we can. There have been some wonderful studies out recently, and Mark Jacobson's study, if you haven't seen it, released from Stanford University. He's an engineer, published in the I think it's called Energy Policy. It uses the state of New York as a microcosm to show exactly what it would take and what it would cost to get to 100% clean renewable energy by 2030. And that means shutting down our nuclear power plants, our coal plants, and continuing to ban the fracking and to shut it down where it exists. The amazing thing, which I really want to, you know, especially plant in your mind, is that this is not only possible, we can beat the climate clock. It's not a matter of, you know, can we push back against irreversible climate change. We can actually beat the climate clock by getting to 100% by 2030. And I should mention also that one of the big leaps forward we can take is by not only banning natural gas, new production, but by shutting down existing production as quickly as we can. Because by doing that, we get a huge boost towards climate neutrality. And the reason for that is so-called natural gas, which is unnatural gas. It should remain beneath the surface of the earth. But that natural gas is one of the very most polluting climate gases for the first 2 decades. After that, it deteriorates and it approaches carbon dioxide after about a century. But if you can shut down natural gas and prevent it from expanding, it creates a big leap forward towards carbon neutrality. Because over a 20-year time frame, natural gas is 75 times more harmful than carbon dioxide. So we actually get a huge leap forward by going after natural gas as quickly as possible, and above all, that means not expanding any new natural gas, no fracking, and shutting down the natural gas that we have. But in getting there, by 2030, the most amazing thing about this study is that it shows it actually pays for itself. It pays for itself. You know, the conventional wisdom is, oh no, we could never afford to do that. It would cost way too much. But in fact, the costs of conversion are actually paid for, get this, by the savings from health impacts that are prevented by moving to clean, renewable energy. And that doesn't That doesn't even include the health benefits of moving to a clean, sustainable food system, which is also part of the benefits, but it hasn't been costed out yet to see how much more money that saves us. We spend right now $3 trillion a year. $3 trillion. That's 3 times as much as what we spend on the military-industrial security complex. We're spending 3 times as much on this sick care system, that is private and public expenditures. Yet we know that about 75% of those costs would be averted by doing the right thing up front. And what is that right thing? It's moving to a green economy, to have a healthy food system, an active and healthy transportation system, and getting rid of pollution. And this actually occurred. This occurred in Cuba when their oil pipeline went down in the early 1990s, and suddenly their economy is crashing because they don't have the imports and the support from the Soviet Union anymore. Overnight, they had to convert to clean renewable energy, a healthy local food system, and active and public transportation. So suddenly they're not breathing any more pollution. They have local, healthy, and largely plant-based food to eat. And they're going places under muscle power. So what do you think happens? You'd think they'd be totally stressed out, and you'd see their health really crashing because their economy has crashed. But actually what happened then, this is documented in the Professional Epidemiology Journal, so it's not like this is, Cuba propaganda or something like that. Definitely not. What happened was, within 3 to 5 years, their obesity rates declined by 50%, their death rates from diabetes declined by 50%, and their death rates from heart attacks and strokes went down by 20 to 35%. That is something we cannot do in this country with a $3 trillion healthcare system. We can't even get close to that, and they did it by spending $0. So, I just want to make the point that we can do this if health counted, if our lives 30 or 50 years from now counted, if democracy counted, we would be there today. Because as you know, the debate in the climate community now, and the debate among really everybody who's not paid to walk around, with their eyes closed, the debate is not whether or not we are in rather deep and troubled waters on the climate. That's not the debate. The debate now is whether we hit the wall, or should I say we go over the cliff. Will it be in 2050 or will it be in 2100? So we are debating the date at which civilization and arguably human survival comes to an end. This is outrageous that we are having such a debate about when it all shuts down. The debate should be, what do we need to do right now to ensure that we transition with all human haste, all possible intensity. We move right now to that economy which is clean, just, green, and sustainable. And we do have the know-how and the wherewithal to do that. It's a matter of, I think, using the power that we actually have. Because what happened 2 weeks ago? With almost no lead time to get organized at all, for the first time in history that I know of, we stopped a war before it started. With no time at all to get organized and get the word out. There wasn't time to go out and demonstrate or do civil disobedience. It was like drop everything and call your congressmen and women and go there and tell them, in no uncertain terms, if you take us to war, we'll show you the door. And that's how we need to lobby. It's not on bended knee, it's with a power fist. That's why we need third parties. That is why we need independent parties. That's not the whole revolution. It's not all in the ballot box. But if we neglect the ballot box, then they can neglect us on all policymaking across the board. So we have a paradigm there that we can build on. And I want to say 2 minutes about a program for an emergency green economic transformation. And I think that needs to be our demand, and that we settle for nothing less. An emergency green economic transformation that puts everyone back to work, creates 20 million jobs right now, that puts a halt to climate change, and that makes wars for oil obsolete. That is what an emergency green economic transformation can do, and by the way, it also delivers our health back to us at the same time, without having to pour pills and medical procedures on us, simply by removing the poisons in our food, our air, and our water that are part of the system. We can also reclaim our health as part of the windfall of this emergency green economic transition. And I think we need to insist on that at the local, state, national, and international levels. Why are we even talking about a war in Syria right now? They talk about Syria as a, as a surrogate war. Well, what exactly is it a surrogate for? It's a surrogate really for fossil fuel access, and specifically the natural gas pipelines that want to go through Syria from the Persian Gulf. They want to go through Syria to get to the Mediterranean in order to feed Europe's hunger for energy. Well, if Europe had a 100% clean renewable energy system, that competition wouldn't be taking place. And if we had 100% clean renewable energy, we wouldn't need to be putting $1 trillion a year into our military industrial security complex, which is basically about securing oil and fossil fuels. So this is a win-win scenario. And in addition to calling for jobs, and jobs as a human right, jobs at living wages as a human right, it also calls for an economic bill of rights, which includes education as a human right, including through college and forgiving student debt. Instead of bailing out the banks, which we are still doing to the tune of $85 billion a month, that's a well-kept secret, but that is what QE3 is all about. Quantitative easing 3 is about printing, creating $85 billion a month and giving it to Wall Street. That's why the stock market has had this amazing recovery. It's partly the housing recovery as well, and why everyday people do not have a taste of that recovery, because it's all going to the top. Instead, we can be bailing out the students and not the banks. We should be breaking up the banks and putting the bankers in jail who got us into this mess to start with. And we refer to this emergency green economic transformation as a Green New Deal. And it builds on the New Deal that actually did get us out of the Great Depression. So this is not like rocket science or an experiment. This is something that we know works. It's absolutely inexcusable that it hasn't already been implemented, and we should insist on nothing less. It includes also, I should mention, financial reforms, breaking up the banks, creating public banks and municipal banks as public utilities. It also includes public utilities as a human right, including access to transportation, to energy, electricity, heat, and the internet as public utilities that are run for the public good, not for profit, at minimal cost. And of course, it includes demilitarization. So, this is it's a fairly comprehensive program, but it's something that is completely, it represents what the American people are calling for. And I want to really underscore that. It's not as though, we are some fringe movement, to be talking about jobs and good living wages. And by the way, defeating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, if you don't know about it, every fight that you are fighting now for local food to stop fracking, to shut down nuclear power plants, for living wages, for safe working conditions. Forget it, because after the next month, if they pass the TPP, the protections that we establish at the community, state, and national level are all trumped by the multinational corporations who can sue the pants off of us for trying to defend workers' rights, human health, and the environment. They can trump us for, get this, reducing future profits. That's what has priority. So go to, if you don't know about this, if you're not already plugged in, go to flushthetpp.org, a memorable URL, and you can get plugged in. We can stop this. We have stopped over a dozen of these outrageous corporate free trade agreements in the past. It's all a matter of getting sunlight on it. They're trying to keep it quiet, and they're going to try to ram it through Congress this month to get fast-track authority, which means then it's out of our hands. So I hate to lobby. I never lobby. But if you lobby with a power fist, that is, don't ask your elected officials, tell them. Tell them that they are in deep trouble and that you will work to have them unelected at the next opportunity if they allow this to go through. So weigh in, be heard. And that's what we need to do as well on an emergency green economic transformation. We really can fix this. We can fix it in time, and we can fix it in a way that addresses these converging crises that every one of us feel, that the American public out there feels. What they don't have, is a network and something to tie into and something to get organized with. So that is the struggle. It's how we organize. And I want to leave you with one last thought and one last URL. The conversation keeps coming up. What do we do? We need to do something really different. We can't keep doing what we've been doing. So remember about 2 months ago, the anti-GMO movement got out. They had a day to show their power. And 2 million people came out around the world. And what happened? Monsanto got scared. And they said, okay, you can have Europe back. For one day of peaceful demonstrations. Now imagine, what if everybody who needed a job, who needs living wages, who needs to get out of student debt, who needs to get out of the school to prison pipeline, you start adding up these numbers. 1 out of every 2 Americans is in poverty. 39 million students are in debt. Just from those numbers right there, we've got a quorum. What if we got all those people to come out for a day or maybe a week or maybe a month of direct action for emergency economic transformation for people, peace, and the planet? And we call it something like a global climate convergence for people, peace, and the planet, or maybe it's a global climate strike. But it's about getting out, not taking no for an answer, and standing up for the future that we can have. We have the power to do it, like Alice Walker says. Biggest way people give up power is by not knowing they have it to start with. We have the power, we got the solutions, we got the vision. It's all about getting organized. If you're interested, either slip me your email or go to globalclimateconvergence.org. At this point, it's just a sign up, but it will be a website soon. And let's give them something to think about.
Is a second speaker, Richard Larios. He is a member of, and I love the name of this, the Free Association of Anarchists. Association, Anarchists, Free Association. And he has helped in the creation and participation of a whole range of grassroots movements and programs and projects throughout the Los Angeles area. Richard.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm really happy to see everybody here. I was talking about, what is eco-socialism earlier or late last year with a friend from the YJC, Young Communist League, and we're throwing out ideas. What is it? What does it look like, right? I actually took the stance because he felt that there was a set utopia, right? There's a set eco-socialist society out there. We haven't figured it out yet. I personally felt that when we're talking about eco-socialism, we're talking more of ethics, right? Because, we don't want to uproot anyone's culture. I'm really against cultural genocide. I'm indigenous, and so I'm anti anything that's going to infringe on someone's culture, personally. So what we're asking, what is eco-socialism? What are we talking about? We're talking about socialism that keeps in mind the ecosystem in which we find ourselves, right? So when thinking of that, shouldn't we naturally think about the way we treat other species and whether or not we practice something that Peter Singer calls speciesism, a discrimination against other species, right? I mean, we could go into a whole range of topics as to why we are that way. Some people say it's religion, right? Man is, is everything, and everything was made around man. I tend to believe more in evolution where, we got to this point, right? We got to this position of knowledge and understanding. And so let's say that's part of the ethic, right? We'll keep that, on the back burner. I'm not here to set what is and isn't, but, let's say that is one. If we follow that line, obviously we'd have to deal with the question of animal factory farming, which is said to be in the top 3 reasons of deforestation, right? Not only that, but if you're talking about agrarian justice, you're talking about you're feeding 21 pounds of protein to animals so that you could eat 1 pound of their flesh. That doesn't make sense, right? So if we're talking about eco-socialism, what are we talking about, right? We're talking about ethics, So let's say we get rid of the animal farms, right? Shut them down, no more animal factory farms. But now that's cultural genocide because a lot of cultures are based upon what they consume, what they eat, right? So like I said, I'm anti-cultural genocide. So what's the question of that? What's the answer to that question, better said? Well, why not decentralize it? Why is it so centralized? Capitalism has everything centralized. Centralization is very dangerous, right? If food is only being produced in 2 places in the world and they say, you know what, I'm not feeding you, well, you're in a very bad position, right? So just this one idea, this one, ethical idea leads us to a strain of things, right? We get rid of animal factory farms. What are you doing? You're decentralizing the food source, right? Now everyone is able to eat. Not only that, you're taking away, fishing and all that kind of stuff from little villages, little towns, so on and so forth, but you're giving it back to them. You're empowering the people, right? So what's the other question, though? So who owns the land, right? Who owns the land? Is land property to begin with? That's another ethical question, right? Is land property that we can say, this is yours, that's his, yada, 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 right? I personally disagree that land is property, right? And I love when Thomas Paine said it, right? He said, it is a position to be that the earth in its natural uncultivated state was and ever would have remained the common property of the human race. In that state, every being would have had a joint proprietor of the soil and in all its natural production. Right? So now if we use this as a basis of ethics, what does that lead us to? There could honestly be crimes against earth. Right? There could be crimes against the earth which could be interpreted to as crimes against humanity. Right? So questions of pollution don't belong to individual corporations, right? They don't even belong to individual communities. They belong to the world in itself. So when I think of eco-socialism, I'm thinking of a socialism, right? A democratic process that takes into account everything that's going to be affected by that decision, right? So we're talking about trying to build a whole new democratic system. We're not just talking about, little reforms, little tweaks here. Overall, the structure stays the same. We're talking about a new system that has yet to be created. And so when we're talking about eco-socialism, in my opinion, we're talking about an ethical question, right? So if we don't own the land, right, and we're looking for harmony as opposed to manipulation with all the beings that we share this land with, right, then what is the democratic process that keeps them in mind when we make these decisions, right? And so if this is truly eco-socialism that we're looking for, then how do we vote on what natural resources get used for what, right? Because if we agree that the earth belongs to no one but belongs to everyone, then everyone is a stakeholder in decisions that affect the earth, and so all these decisions belong to everybody, right? And so that's what I want to propose, that eco-socialism to me is these ethical questions, and if you follow these ethical questions, they'll lead you to a plan of action. right? For me personally, I want to destroy animal factory farming, decentralize it, right? We're going to lose. They said that the Pew Commission on Industrial Farm Animal Production said that in the United States, because we eat meat every meal, right? The average American eats meat every meal, right? That's 3 times a day. That if we were to cut back on our meat consumption by 10%, we'd be able to feed an extra 60 million people, right? That's only 10%, right? Let's say 30%. Let's say we don't eat meat for breakfast anymore, period, right? How many more people is that, right? I mean, if you're thinking about it, you know, and the environmental impacts that animal factory farms have are crazy. And that's not even talking about biological, because all these antibiotics that they feed the animals are creating new strains of viruses that we don't even know how to deal with yet, right? So when you follow these principles, it'll already lead you to a plan of action, right? So what is the plan of action? You know, do what you see fit. That's my personal opinion. It's so massive that I don't throw out voting. I don't throw out, you know, pushing McDonald's or wherever, have a vegetarian option. Hey, why not? You're promoting the idea that, you know what, we shouldn't eat so much meat, you know? Do what you see fit, but do something. Because the truth is, our actions have already fucked us, right? We haven't felt it fully yet. We're gonna feel it. But we've already set in motion such a damaging effect to the earth that we can't even comprehend yet, right? As to what is gonna occur and how many of us are gonna die. And I have a friend who's big on biology, and you know, she's always saying, you know, humans, cockroaches, and rats are gonna survive, right? But we don't know to what proportion, right? And she's always saying she's waiting for the new disease that's gonna be man-made, right? The new disease that's gonna wipe us all out is gonna be our own doing. You know, we have a culture of suicide. We don't care. We don't care. I don't know how to say it. Even me, I care, right? I don't eat meat, right? Hey, I'm vegetarian, I'm going vegan, right? I bike and I walk when I can, yada, yada, yada. I still own a 4Runner, right? I still own a 4Runner in a city. Why is that? Because of capitalism. And that's something that I feel has always been a disconnect between red and green, right? And as an anarchist, it's blood. It's blood. We hate the green anarchists, right? We hate them. Like we see them, we beef it out. Like, what are you? I'm red. Oh, I'm green. I'm just black, right? Black anarchist. I like anarchism, and you know, whatever other strands you're from, hey, I'll synthesize it into my overall ideology. But the point is that if you're not looking at the ecological problems from an anti-capitalist position, you're not talking about much. You're talking about tweaking things, you know. You're talking about mild reforms, and you know, trust me, I work with a lot of animal liberationists, and they have no problem with capitalism. They say, no, capitalism is not the problem. It's human beings. It's human nature. And I look at them and I say, no, you know what? My friend, Dr. Flores, who's a cultural anthropologist at UCLA, he's always saying that, you know, anthropologists, they're aware that, you know, the environment and the culture has an effect on human beings, right? So that's commonly known, it's commonly understood. So why would someone think that it's just this innate, you know, savagery within humans? You know, it's not. And not only that, even if it was, right? Let us say, for instance, oh, you know, whatever, racism is just some inborn thing, and, you know, that's just how we are because yada, 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 whatever reason. No matter what, capitalism uses everything as a tool, and everything on capitalism is whatever it was on steroids, right? So regardless, we have to kill capitalism. We have to smash it, right? There's no other in between. And so with that, I also like to add that we have to rebuild that connection, right? We have a disconnect with the environment. I mean, shit, I'm trying to garden and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm so lost. I'm just like, shit, right? And it, I mean, you know, there's such a disconnect, you know, it's horrible, right? And what does that do? You take the environment for granted because you never come in contact with it, right? even the disconnect with animals, right? I mean, when's the last time anyone seen a cow get butchered? Or a chicken get its feathers plucked? I mean, I lived in Nicaragua for a bit when my dad got deported, so I've seen some of it. And my uncle, there's a butcher, and I just went back there maybe a year ago and spent the summer with my uncle, and he's still a butcher. I was vegetarian at the time, so he didn't kill anything when I was there. But I could see his workshop and everything. But it's the point that there's such a disconnect. My uncle, who's a butcher, loves his animals. His animals sleep with him, right? And I'm talking about pigs, and he tells me pigs are clean, pigs are smart, right? And I don't know, I didn't really talk to the pigs too much, but they seemed okay, right? Yeah. Oh, I like that one. I like that. But it's the point that there's still a connection. Even though he consumes these animals, there's a connection that he's made, right? Because what capitalism does, and it's beautiful, right? Because it works for capitalism. It alienates us from everything and everyone, right? We don't even, I mean, I walked around one time trying to do an experiment, right? We anarchists, we filmed it. It was brilliant. It was very funny. And all we did was we said hello and good morning to everybody to see how many good mornings, hellos we would get and how many people would stop and try to engage us in a conversation. We did 100 people before we stopped, and we found one person that would talk to us. Right?
Where was it? Los Angeles?
Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles by Pershing Square. I don't know if that's a bad spot. If maybe I went to South Central, I would have had a different reaction. But, you know, we're so distrusting of each other, right? And it's capitalism, right? Even when you're in South Central, you know what I mean? You think you're going to get shot. You think you're going to get robbed. You know what I mean? You don't know because they portrayed this to you. They don't want you to talk to each other. And it's a form to make us victims and to keep you powerless. The same way in my own city, I seen a neighbor getting beat by her husband, right? So I run out, and all my neighbors say, no, don't worry about it. I called the cops already. I say, well, first of all, I don't like the cops. They're not going to make anything better. But second of all, that doesn't mean that I'm okay now. I'm going to just go back to my apartment and hear her screaming as she's being beat. But that's how we think. You see a house burning down, what do? You don't run in there. You don't try to throw water on it, right? That's not what they tell you. Tell you call the fire department. That's it. After that, you just sit down, relax. You know? So we're losing that connection. There's a disconnect with everything, right? Even with each other, there's a disconnect. With other beings, there's a disconnect. When you could not care about, you know, a little calf, right, being born, right? And cows are actually very sentimental, and they're actually very attached to the mothers, and they pull them apart, you know, and they don't let them move because they want that veal. It's so nice, it's so soft, right? And you don't care, like you don't give a fuck. There's a disconnect, right? When you can honestly say, I don't give a fuck. You know, I'm gonna drive my car all day because I don't like to walk 2 blocks, right? I don't want to take the bus here, even though the bus ride is only 20 minutes, right? Or I don't have to be in a hurry, so I could take the bus, right? But no, I want to be lazy. I want to take the car, right? Because it's easier. There's a disconnect because you're not understanding that, you know what? All these beings play a part in the ecosystem that we're trying to protect. So from an eco-socialist standpoint, you know, I think that's what the question is. What are the ethics that we're working with, right? And I think from those ethics, our plan of action will naturally arise. So thank you all.
Wonderful. Okay. Our third speaker tonight is Chris Williams. Chris Williams is a longtime environmental activist, and I might add an activist in a whole variety of things. He's a member of ISO, the International Socialist Organization from New York. He is also a professor of physics, and he has published a book called Ecology and Socialism, Solutions to Capitalist Ecological Crises. He publishes regularly also in the International Socialist Review, and hot off the press, new article, which we all should be reading, and I say that not having read it, but seeing what it's about. It's about the topics that we're talking about here. It's in capitalism, climate and capitalism in the most recent edition, and it's called Strategic Tactics in the Environmental Movement. Okay, and he's talking about what are the politics that we're going to go forward with and what are the politics that are currently going on. So, with no further ado, Chris Williams.
Thanks very much. The reason I put this up is because it's...
Do you need help with the button? I can help you.
Can you help me out? Thanks very much. The reason that I put this up is just because, this is from today. And so it's one of the 350 organized demonstrations. There were over 300 people down on Wall Street today, along with people from System Change, Not Climate Change, basically drawing a line around where Wall Street is going to be underwater in the next 40 or so years. So hopefully pretty soon, because I actually picked this up. This is from this week. I don't normally buy the Daily News. But on the front cover here, it's NASDAQ hack. He breached site in just 10 minutes. Evildoers could wreak havoc. And I was thinking, yeah, you think the evildoers only just got there? Anyway, I was thinking about that. And then, you know, some of the solutions that capitalism comes up with for how we're going to overcome the economic crisis. What do we need to do? And so this is the front cover of the New York Times a little while ago, saying that the way out of this crisis, if we're not shopping enough, if we're not consuming enough, if our economy is not growing, how can we get it going? This is their answer. On the macro kind of level, what we need to do is expand further. So if you go to the, thank you. This is what they would like us to turn our children into. I don't know whether you can read that, but this is a photo I took the other day because I was astonished at the depths to which capitalist advertising would go. And if you can't see it, it says customer in training, and obviously they're child-sized carts, just to make sure that we're beginning the indoctrination process as early as possible. And just to give you one stat on the insanity of this system and the tremendous waste and the way in which we can reappropriate that for productive uses, the amount spent on advertising in this country alone is $1 trillion. That is twice what is spent on all education, public and private, from kindergarten through graduate school. What a tremendous waste of human potential, a tremendous waste of resources. And you think about the students going into debt and more debt and further debt and so on, and then they're squandering $1 trillion on total uselessness, convincing us to buy things that we don't even actually need. Go ahead. And so, you know, some of this some of today has been kind of depressing, right? A lot of bad things are happening, and clearly we need some kind of new paradigm for how to organize and move forward. And I think, you know, I just wanted to say that the people who organized and set up this day of coming together and trying to discuss equally social justice questions along with ecological justice questions is a huge step forward. There's over 300 people registered today, and I think that is a real step forward. Even to have a Green Party member, an anarchist, and a revolutionary socialist on the same panel. I think is pretty good. In the meantime, if you actually did think that you were suffering from capitalism, you're probably right, because you know, this is the Financial Times from yesterday. J.P. Morgan is fined $920 million over London whale fiasco, as if that's even a lot of money for J.P. Morgan Chase. They have no problem paying that. And this is Time from this week, actually. How Wall Street won, because none of the supposed re-regulation of Wall Street has actually happened. And so, going back to waste, I mean, there's the insane waste of the Pentagon, and this is something that environmentalists obviously need to be talking about a lot more. The military as the single biggest polluter on the planet, not to mention death machine, has to be tackled. And if we're not talking about a massive reduction and ultimately an abolition of the US military, then we're not really being serious on a social level and certainly not on an ecological level. But a lot of people think, well, we've got to reduce waste. The thing is about capitalism, waste is not a sign of malfunction. It's not a sign that things are going wrong. Waste is actually a sign of the success of capitalism. More waste equals better capitalism. Because the problem with this system is it's actually too productive. We make so much stuff, right, even though we're working all the time, that we actually could go back to producing a lot less and have a much higher standard of living. When you're talking about, everybody in the United States eats meat every meal. Well, what about the 1 in 6, according to the Census Bureau, last year, Americans who went without food at some point during that year and didn't have enough? That's 50 million people. The fact is that America, United States, produces enough food to give every single American 8 plates a day. So where is that food going? Half of it is obviously wasted. And that's not just about the food, it's not just about the animals, it's not just about the plants. It's also about the water and the other resources, the energy, the fertilizer, the oil that goes into it. Just one statistic on the insanity that is capitalism. For every 1 calorie of food produced under this system within industrialized agriculture, it takes 10 calories of oil to do it. So talk about an unsustainable system, and there you have agriculture, which is supposed to be one of the most fulfilling things that we have. I mean, when you think about all the stories going back through human culture over thousands of years, the idea of breaking bread together is something fundamental to human society. The idea that we share things that is so integral to our life and the way in which we think about putting things inside our body has been completely undermined and bastardized by fast food, to name just one thing. But 1 in 5 Americans eat at least one meal off their laps on a consistent basis because everybody's running somewhere to get somewhere else. And so, I was glad to see that we had some food here at the conference, another great thing, because we also need to form, as Richard was saying, communities amongst ourselves to build up trust and to be able to see that it's not us fighting each other. We are actually fighting a much worse system around us. And so I am here to say that we need a revolution, comrades.
Yeah.
The reason I say that is for some of the things that we've talked about, but also for the fact on the positive side of things, we're talking about building an anti-capitalist coalition, right, to take on the whole might of capitalism. And then they ask you, well, what are you for? Well, for the survival of humanity, right? Yeah. Pretty certain of that. Yeah. I'm for humanity. That's what I'm for. But when you read and about what the capitalists are saying they want, let me just quote from Forbes just this week. Harry Binswanger. Here's a modest proposal. Anyone who earns $1 million or more should be exempt from all income taxes. Yes, it's too little, and the real issue is not financial, but moral. So to augment the tax exemption in an annual public ceremony, the year's top earner should be awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. He goes on, imagine the effect on our culture. Yeah. Particularly on the young. If the kind of fame and adulation bathing Lady Gaga attached to the more notable achievements of, say, Warren Buffett, or if the moral praise showered on Mother Teresa went to someone like Lloyd Blankfein, who in guiding Goldman Sachs toward billions in profits has done infinitely more good for mankind. That's Forbes magazine. And so this is where they are. Or this is this week's Economist. You probably can't see it from here. Hang on, how economic growth will help prevent extinctions. So, what does it say? It says, I'll quote, over the past few centuries, mankind's economic growth has caused many of the problems that other species face. But as our special report this week argues, greater human prosperity now offers other species their best chance of hanging on. And who's going to help? Who's going to actually be doing this? It may surprise you, thanks very much, to who's going to be actually saving humanity through this economic growth. Quote, when people start to reach middle income level, other species start to benefit. That is partly because as people get richer, their interests begin to extend beyond necessities towards luxuries. For some people, that means expensive shoes. For others, that's a day's bird watching. So in other words, not only this is not only is more economic growth the answer, right? But how lucky is that for the economists? The rich people are the ones who are going to save the planet. There's a whole other load of things that I could go through. But in the Financial Times recently, the chief economist of Citibank was arguing that water should be the next global phenomenon as an asset class. So he says there will be different grades and types of fresh water. Writing in chief CEO of Citibank, writing in Financial Times. Just the way we have light, sweet, and heavy sour crude oil today, water will be the asset class, in my view, eventually the single most important physical commodity-based asset class, dwarfing oil, copper, agricultural commodities, and precious metals. So they're already thinking about, well, how are we going to further privatize everything else on the planet? And I'm not even going to go into the Obama charade, which has come out today with the regulations on coal, which is an absolute farce. The idea that they're going to regulate only future coal plants with a technology that doesn't exist yet, and they're going to give them 7 years to implement it anyway, is a complete joke. And in fact, Gina McCarthy, head of the EPA, let that out of the bag just today when she said, I believe the proposal that they're putting forward, rather than killing future coal, actually sets out a pathway forward for coal to be part of the diverse energy supply in the future. So that is from the head of the EPA, who just got back from her busy schedule awarding an environmental prize to Raytheon, of all people, which specializes in missiles, land, air, water, and space. In fact, prides itself on being the world's premier missile maker. And so they won a Climate Leadership Award. And it was presented by her. So anyway, thinking about all of these things, I think we have to really address the question of what kind of society and what kind of world do we really want to live in? Because we know that the world is now on track, and it just came out a little while ago, that by 2050, they're going to be needing to spend about $1 trillion a year just keeping our cities safe. New Orleans, New York, and others. And we also know that if this continues, that not everybody suffers equally from these kind of environmental disasters, right? In LA, if you're African American, you are twice as likely to die in a heat wave as if you're white. And we know that after the riots of the 1960s, they rebuilt parts of LA, and they didn't just do it on the basis of thinking about, well, how are we going to get people around in cars and forcing people into that mode of transportation. They also thought about how do we keep the poor people and the people of color from burning down the center of LA again. So you can also put a map to LA and look at the outline and the map of where the freeways and overpasses and so on are, and see them as moats, right? They're there to protect the rich from everybody else. And so you also look at LA, and it's one of the cities in this country that over a third of the landmass of LA is non-residential parking. So you're not driving your car maybe around, on average in the United States, 90% of the time. So 90% of the time the car is just sitting there, right, doing nothing, except it's already created a massive ecological devastated area because of the runoff, the concrete manufacture, the water, etc., etc., etc. How would we redesign cities? not to be designed for cars, built for cars, because we don't actually know what a city would look like if it was built for us, right? It's built for the machines that they make us drive around in ones in, which are, you know, but you put a gallon of gas in your car, only 25% of that is actually used to make the car run. The other 75% just goes as heat. So it's not surprising that cities are far hotter than the surroundings. And so when we think about this, this level of disconnection that Richard was talking about, alienation in the Marxist sense, the fact that we live separated off from each other, something that Marx called the dot-like isolation of capitalism, which I think is a really great phrase for how we think about ourselves as individuals as the most important thing, and there is no such thing as society, to quote Margaret Thatcher. She's dead. That was a big party. You know, how do we rethink things in terms of community? And it's certainly true that we are also. Marx talked about the need to overcome the metabolic rift. Yes. And at the time, the word metabolism was in fact a brand new word. It only just recently been invented to talk about an individual cell in science. Things come in, things go out, you use energy, you produce waste. Marx, what was revolutionary about the way that Marx used the word metabolism and the metabolic rift, was he was talking about the whole of society. And there was a metabolic rift created between what comes in and what goes out under capitalism, because capitalism is a linear system, right? All along the line, from the mines all the way to the consumer when they buy something, waste comes out at every location. It is completely linear. And as Barry Commoner, perhaps one of the first eco-socialists, wrote a book called The Closing Circle. How do we go back to what is more natural in nature, in the world, which is how do we reuse the waste that we produce, and how do we think about that? But obviously none of that is worthwhile unless we're talking about not just the question of ecology. And actually the whole word environment is problematic because it posits something that is outside of us, as if we are separate, which is why ecology is much preferred. Because then we embed ourselves within the thing that keeps us alive, i.e. the biosphere. But how would we reimagine our lives if we were to overcome that rift that says animals are separate from plants, right? We have animals one place, we have plants somewhere else, and then humans live somewhere else as well. And then if we can offshore our industry, we'll do that too. How can we reintegrate all of those things, as Richard was saying, so that we actually know what it really means to see an animal, alive or dead or killed or butchered, and how do we think about growing stuff so that we can actually move forward, thanks, and know how to garden, right? Know what it means to do those things. And there is a sense in which, you know, there was a recent article, I was going to quote from it, but I don't have time. Are you worse off than a medieval peasant? And medieval peasants, right? And by now you probably think, yes, I maybe am. And it's, in many ways you'd be right, because medieval peasants only worked about 150 days a year. The United States has no national vacation policy at all. If you're lucky after a year, you might get 8 days off. How many days off does Congress get?
I didn't even know they worked.
Good point. They're officially supposed to be at work. Well, actually, no, sorry. Vacation days for Congress this year are 239. And Eric, yes, that's the only time they're supposed to be at work. And Eric Cantor just released his calendar for the year. There is not a single week. He's the majority leader of the House. There's not a single week in his calendar. It's online. You can go check it out. That has a 5-day week in it. Nor a single weekend, by the way. So they've worked out how to be better off than medieval peasants. And while we are being sucked back into a world that is worse, not just in terms of our own humanity, but in terms of the natural world itself. And just to kind of conclude about how we rethink things, we currently live in a world based on 3 things, essentially, right? We produce things because they make money. and we produce those under competition. And for those reasons, we lack any real democracy. So what I would argue eco-socialism is the reverse of those three things. We want to live in a world that is based on production for the things that we need, which will be democratically decided by all of us, under conditions, so under real democracy, and based on real cooperation, actual cooperation, as opposed to competition. Because we know, I mean, I would be depressed if we didn't know what the answers are, or the technology didn't exist. But we know those things exist. It's entirely a social and political question, and so that's much more hopeful, right? Because we've overthrown tyranny and oppression and exploitation throughout human history. If there's one thing about human nature that is valid, you can definitely say a hatred of tyranny, oppression, and exploitation. We don't like those things, right? And we cooperate and work together in order to get rid of them. We are the vast majority. We are the 99%. And so as such, we can absolutely overthrow capitalism and begin to find out what it really means. Because you think about the insanity of capitalism. Does everybody really need their own car? Obviously not, for all the reasons I went into earlier. Do you actually need your own washer dryer, right, when it's in use for like, what, an hour a week or something? What happens if we had these communally held, and not owned by anybody, but the community works out how to do those things? What happens if we were only working 20 hours a week in socially useful jobs, which makes you happier and healthier and so on? We had a whole discussion about what it means to have fresh, nutritious food. What is it makes up a balanced diet? How should we treat animals? All the things that we never get a say in before. And I've mentioned this before, but you know, I've never heard anybody complain about libraries, right? Have you? Right? Right, exactly. Goddamn libraries. It's like they're everywhere. And so, you know, how do we expand that? No, you know, you're allowed to use books. You don't have to pay for them. You take them back. You have a conversation about them over dinner and whatever else, and we reestablish what it is to actually be human while overcoming. And the only way we're going to do that is through a mass movement, because what I'm talking about is how do we alter what it means to have a high quality of life. It's clearly not about accumulation of things like they tell us it is. It's about relationships between each other and between the earth upon which we depend. That is what it means to find out what it means to be human, which is why we need to learn so much from indigenous cultures. Right. And only under those conditions of a mass movement are we going to acquire the idea on a mass basis that we need an alternative way of thinking about what is a quality of life, which means that we'll also have to tackle questions of racism, sexism, sexuality, because we're also so distorted in all kinds of about our own sexual beings that we don't really even understand what that means to start with. And so I think there are so many questions that will open up that human nature and society will be able to blossom and go forward in a genuine way so that we can actually overcome some of the filth and degradation, all of it ultimately, that we've inherited from this disgusting system that should have been consigned to the dustbin of history a long time ago. And you know, I'll just finish with one quote from Marx, if I may take 30 more seconds, because I think it's an absolutely important question. How did they end up with the land?
They stole it.
Right. Right. Why do we have to go and beg to the banks to go into debt to them for 30 years to get the land back that was originally ours in the first place? And obviously indigenous people primarily. So I think, you know, quoting from Marx, I think just to finish this is, I think, the connection between us right now and 7 generations into the future. From the standpoint of a higher economic form of society, private ownership of the globe by single individuals will appear quite as absurd as private ownership of one man by another. Even a whole society, a nation, or even all simultaneously existing societies taken together are not the owners of the globe. They are only its possessors, its usufructuaries. And like bona patris familias, good heads of household, they must hand it down to succeeding generations in an improved condition. And I think that is our challenge and that is our task, and we need to build for the future. Thanks very much.